If you could design the perfect network of the future for leaders like yourselves to help you know good people, understand and identify business opportunities, what would it look like?
Well, obviously LinkedIn's the one you go to, and like obviously
Yeah.
LinkedIn's a fantastic tool and a brilliant website. Like my main issue with LinkedIn is just the fluff around everything. You can't scroll on LinkedIn for more than 2 minutes without seeing someone's dog, someone's hike that they went on the weekend, and a coffee shop that they're sat in because they're moaning about work from home or whatever it might be. Like it's all of that stuff, which like is the non-professional stuff, which I feel like really kind of ruins the sort of point of what LinkedIn is meant to be about. Like
Mhm.
for me, like a networking group or a networking kind of platform like that, it should be business and career focused around whichever niche you're in. And if you're interested in networking, recruitment, you follow X, Y, and Z people, like that's how it should be, and the content should be based around that. It's ultimately like what I struggle with is all that
Hmm.
added fluff to build engagement, and then you need this engagement to do this. Like I'm not posting on Instagram all the time or on making TikTok dances and stuff. Like it's not who I am as a person.
Correct. Yep.
But yeah, somewhere to get rid of that added fluff, where it's a group of people who are all kind of bought into that same idea of, if something makes sense, I will help you out here, and in the future when I need something back, you'll do the same for me. Like that's what that platform would look like in kind of layman's terms.
Hey, Mitchell. How are you? Welcome to the Intro Code.
Hey, I'm good. Thanks for having me, Pushkar. I'm excited for it today.
Amazing, amazing. It's fall already, and I can't believe it. It's three-fourths of the way there for 2025. Times moves quickly.
Honestly, I try to not think about it on a daily basis, how quick this year's gone, but that's such is life, and sales, especially the never-ending vicious cycle of what's next.
Amazing. So, Mitchell, first off, thank you so much for being part of this. I know we've been talking about networking. We've been talking about creating relationships, getting introductions. And from your perspective, when we connected, what, a couple of months ago, we hit it off on that central notion that what people today need is more, or the ability to leverage more of their network. And that's what got us started. So, in the same spirit, would love to kick it off, hand it over to you. Tell us your story. Tell us the Mitchell story. What made you successful as a professional in not just the HR industry? I know you have a deep background. Let's hear your story and give an introduction to everybody.
Percent. Yeah, as most people probably listening to this podcast as well, I'm from the UK. I live in Manchester, and I've been in the recruitment industry now for close to 5 years, and came straight out of university. And the classic story of like, I don't really know what to do, but always kind of had that gift of the gab, so to speak. Next thing I know, I'm in a recruitment agency, and I'm working for a startup called SearchWorks, where I've been for close to 5 years now. And it's been brilliant in recruitment. It's a lot of highs, a lot of lows, and a lot of everything else in between, as you can imagine in sales. But for me, like when we talk about the power of connections and networking, it's probably came a little bit later on in my career so far. You kind of get into the recruitment industry, and it's all about delivery and candidates. When you kind of first get into the recruitment industry, like you're very kind of short-sighted, because you're just thinking like, okay, I want to do a deal, I want to do a placement. As I've kind of swayed more into the business development side, and that's a role I've taken on kind of full time now in our sales department, and I lead our US function, and within that specialize in the payment tech scene. Relationships are everything, and especially in the US market, which is probably the biggest difference compared to the initial kind of 3 years I spent in the UK market. Relationships are so much more prioritized. A typical sales cycle in the UK can be as easily as a few days, from cold calling a manager, having a meeting set the next day, you have terms signed and agreed, and it's just like, go and find me someone. Whereas, I've got literally just this week, we've closed out a client that it's taken me nearly 18 months of continuous relationship building, value adding, trying to get intros into different people in the business to kind of work that kind of that scale within the business to know more people and name drop more people. So relationships and networking and having that warm lead and that inside connection, is it's my whole job and life now, day to day.
Absolutely, yeah. And I was just taking a couple of notes as you were speaking. You've always emphasized relationships as the foundation on which you have built your career, even as you've transitioned over from being just on the recruitment side to now more biz dev, finding new clients. What are your opinions on how you start to get these networking cycles done. For example, this is a very classic sales problem. We need to find more leads, you need to find more opportunities, identify the ICPs, and it gets incredibly hard when you are on the HR recruitment side because these leads or these opportunities are very amorphous. Sometimes it's not clearly defined. They don't know if they need a tech lead or a product manager. So help us understand how you A, start to find these leads, and B, how do you then shape them into an opportunity to get them to close?
Of course, like I think the initial thing, and it's where a lot of recruiters struggle, is being too sort of tunnel vision and single minded. Like, there's leads everywhere in recruitment, and that's from whether it's speaking to candidates you're currently working with, candidates you've placed that you might have spoken to 2-3 years ago, hiring managers who are having problems, looking at recent funding news, 10, 15 solid on a daily basis places to find and generate leads. So you've got to start by looking in the right place, but again, being open to all possibilities. And
Mhm.
the second thing I'd think, and again, like it took me a little while to understand this, but there's no such thing as a bad conversation or a wasted conversation. I can post a job or whatever it might be and think like immediately I know this person's not right for the role, but you've still got to speak to that person, understand their situation, story, why they're looking for a move, or they're looking for a move
Mhm.
because their current employer is having issues with X, Y, and Z problem and they're not doing anything to fix it. Okay, what can I do with that information? Like I try and tell it to my delivery team and maybe more juniors in our business that like you're almost kind of playing Sherlock Holmes every time you speak to a candidate. Like it's so important to take every little piece of information and think, okay, I've got this bit of info here. What are the 1, 2, 3 different actions I can do with it? And just following on from that is, like I said, treating every single person like it's worthwhile and genuine, because you don't know when something's going to come back around. It could be this person who you speak to today who maybe can't do much for you in 4 years' time as a hiring manager at one of your ICPs that you're trying to get into. And if you've kept in constant contact with him by adding genuine value to him, even though you're not getting any sort of transaction out of it, whether it might be certain market insights or rates, or if it's a candidate who's looking for all, passively sending him different options that are open there, or equally just asking like, hey, how are you? I hope you're well. Like, it's the issue people have where it's like, if they don't see a dollar sign, they just switch off to something, which in the
Mhm.
short term you can get away with. But if you want to have a successful career in business development, you've got to be open to everything at all times and be kind of as genuine as you can be with people.
You did bring up a good point, right? One of the things that you are doing from a recruitment perspective is this relentless focus on things that matter, right? So you talked about recent funding news. You talked about being in touch with the candidates that you've placed previously, or even possibly not placed previously,
Yeah.
but were a great fit. And you said, hey, I'm going to reach back out to you when the time comes. So that's great. You also mentioned that you're open to a breadth of fuzziness around what is needed to place this. For example, if its job description doesn't match. So tell us a little bit more about how your story has evolved. I know, how did you get your first break into this? Was it an introduction? Was it a referral? Was it a relationship that came through that helped you get into this career?
Yeah,
That would be a
so
great story to.
Yeah, so in terms of kind of like my big sort of break in recruitment, it came about 6 months in. Like I
Mhm.
said, I was purely sort of on just the delivery side of things where I wasn't even in my head to think about trying to generate leads or business development. And then I kind of had that switch where, that's the kind of big money in recruitment is you can do okay filling other people's business, but if you want to be really successful, you've got to fill your own.
Yeah,
And so I started
well
practicing
said.
on this and asking questions, and it was purely through a candidate. Managed to kind of get them on side. They'd had some troubles. He was looking, but he said like within their own business, at a company called
Mhm.
Frugo. They were having some hiring problems. About half an hour of me trying to charm him over the phone. Probably could have been a 5 minute conversation, and I kept him on there for about 30 minutes. He eventually did me an introduction into the managing director, and then that account, which initially kind of looked like it was going to just be maybe a one-off hire, which I was obviously still thrilled
Mhm.
about at the time. They were an e-commerce company, and it was just kind of off the back of COVID, where everyone through COVID, the e-commerce industry boomed because no one had anything to do other than online shop. So they had a really successful year, grew the business massively. I think over the space of a year, we'd maybe placed up to 30 people in there, which was a massive break for me. It really set me up well for the next kind of couple of years. Yeah, that was it. So it was through an introduction from a candidate who, like I said, I easily could have just been like, okay, cool, and put the phone down and not even thought
Yeah.
about it. But I'd kind of had that hindsight to be like, okay, I've got to take that next step now. Yeah, I managed to work the introduction, and we did a good job finding candidates, and they became a massive account for me and the business.
That's such a great story. So for you, it was, an introduction from a candidate, and that happens more often than you think. In fact, one of the things we were discussing was how some of the recruiters who have me in the past, I've identified value, saying that, hey, you did good by me, and now here are three other folks that I feel
Yeah.
uh, you could help out as well. That's a great one. And I think this is where, at least for me personally, things have all evolved. Looks like things have evolved for you too. But as we evolve, would you say that some of the things that you're doing today in terms of identifying leads, networking, have things changed dramatically over the past 10 years, 12 years that you've seen that you can comment on?
Things have certainly changed a lot. Like I always think the foundation of, if you're asking someone for an introduction or you're going to said networking event, because ultimately the aim is you need to try and speak to someone who can help you or speak to someone who can get you in front of someone who can help you. Like ultimately neither of those things are going to happen if you don't provide a good service or you don't add proper value to a problem.
Yeah.
Like I think it's a large issue with recruitment, and it's, some people say to me, how are you getting introductions or leads from people like that candidate, for example, on that first kind of story? Like if that candidate didn't feel that I was good at my job or was helping them out with something, they wouldn't have done that introduction. They'd have just sort of
Yeah.
passed it by. I think that element to it's always there. I think we see now there's so many more networking events where you can go and get your face out there. LinkedIn content and branding is obviously a massive thing to add, credibility to what you're doing. So certainly those channels have changed a lot. Like I said, podcasting is a massive thing now. Like obviously I'm on your show, you've been on mine. Like podcasting is a huge part of the game. And again, like it's everything you can do to essentially add credibility to yourself and highlight what you can do as a customer, as a client, as a third party, whoever you are, so that when you ask for said intro, whether it's over the phone or you meet someone at an event or you take someone out for drinks and do it, like they've got to feel like, okay, this is worthwhile. So I think that element to it is still the same as like you've got to be able to back up what you're talking about. The LinkedIn, the branding, the online presence, I think that's the real kind of game changer where things have evolved.
That is so good to know. You mentioned briefly how the tools have evolved, how you've started to use them, and you also touched on the podcast bit. Help us understand. I want to tease that bit out because you're doing something which is very unique. Almost feels like this is part of your not just a go-to-market strategy, but also your own thing when it comes to developing new markets, identifying new ICPs and targets.
Yeah, it was initially when we spoke about it, it was actually one of my good friends, Osman. He used to work with me at SearchWorks, and he's since left and gone out of recruitment. But it was something we were speaking about when we were the BD market. There was kind of in recruitment, there was that boom after COVID where companies were doing a lot of hiring, and then it all slowed down, and like the market's been in a pretty sorry state for a couple of years. And we were racking our brains together to think like, how can we sort of differentiate ourselves, or how can we reach a new market that's like, have you messaged someone just saying, hey, can I help you with your jobs? They get 100 of those messages every hour. Like you're not getting a reply. And so we thought, okay, let's make a podcast where we can speak to different leaders about their stories. It's a real opportunity to build relationships with people. It's also it's good content for LinkedIn branding, etc. And then equally, even like from my perspective now, like I've been doing the Leaders in Business show for coming up to sort of a year pretty consistently now. We're sort of halfway through our third season, and it's been an opportunity for me, especially now, like focusing within the payment tech market, to speak to experts in payment tech and also upskill myself, which has been massive. But the outreach we get from the podcast is crazy. I have you on the podcast, Pushkar, and then we publish that episode, and then there's people from your network who then like the show, who I can then reach out to a bit. Oh, sorry, you like the episode of Pushkar? We had him on the show. Would love to network with more leaders in the space, and it's just a snowball that continues. And like, if there's one thing that I've learned over the past, ironic now because I'm a guest on a podcast, but if there's one thing I learned, that successful people like talking about why they're successful and sharing that. So it's been an incredible avenue to be able to speak to targets who typically you'd think like, oh, I haven't got a chance in hell of being able to speak to the CTO of X company. Like they'd be unbelievable to try and get into to do their recruitment. And you do the podcast, you have a couple of follow-up meetings, and then if you can kind of twist that conversation, oh, obviously we do recruitment, like how's things looking? It's been a brilliant strategy and it's paid dividend massively over the past 12 months.
That is so cool, Mitchell. Part of what you mentioned was you're using this podcast not just as a sort of channel to LinkedIn content in general. What you hit on essentially allowing you to upskill. Because as a recruiter, sometimes you find that there appears to be like a gap between what the recruiter understands
Yeah.
versus what the market really needs. And the podcast is now giving you that sort of ramp up, or rather an ongoing, I don't want to
Yeah,
say like a maintenance
100%.
thing
Yeah.
where you can, yeah, so that is great. The other thing that you kind of hinted at, which also is very important, is you haven't talked about networking events at all. For me, when I look at it as a professional, networking for me becomes a lot of events that I attend,
Yeah.
conferences, and so on and so forth. But as a recruiter, you are essentially a one-man army and you're trying to address a lot of these things and you don't have the ability to travel to events, or at least that is not part of your standard arsenal.
Yeah. So I was
Yes.
going to say, like with the networking events, it's sort of the one difficulty I have at the moment being a US recruiter stuck in the UK. The long term objective over the next kind of 12, 24 months is to facilitate that move across the pond. Like I'd love nothing more. Like I see guests who I've had on the podcast and Money 2020, and like I've done a lot with the like Women in Pay Tech board and like all the guests and great events they've got going on over there. Like I value face to face time massively. Like, I think it's a huge chapter, and I still have clients in the UK, and there'll be certain
Mhm.
events I go to in the UK. But ultimately, like I. I've tried to steer away from becoming kind of the jack of all trades, master of none. And so I do my best at this point where if it's not US payment tech based, I try and say no to that business because ultimately I
Interesting.
think it's kind of, it's good in the short term, but ultimately if I want to be the number one recruitment agent in the payment tech scene across the US, I can't be filling a e-commerce job in Manchester, UK. Like the two don't align. So I try my best to sort of alienate myself from that. But like I have colleagues in the UK. One of my sales department guys, Dan, he specializes in the green tech industry and he's at networking events every week up and down the country, going to different panel shows and all sorts. There's definitely a lot of benefit in it, but my situation right now, it's not feasible for me at the moment, unfortunately.
Yeah, you do bring up some great points, right? As a recruiter, you want to meet people in person, or at least face to face. So, how do you balance that? It's very rare for a recruiter to go out and meet people in person. I know you've had some success doing that, but being remote, what are some of the things that you do to keep these relationships? A, identify the relationships, and B, once you have something, how do you keep them warm?
Yeah, I think this is where a lot of recruiters struggle, and again, I'm totally not like I fall into this trap myself sometimes,
Yeah.
but I always think that whenever I go onto a call with someone, whether it's a CTO of somewhere or a senior engineering manager or CEO, MD, whoever this person might be that I'm speaking to for the first time, I try and speak to them the same way as I would do if they were next to me in the line at a coffee shop. And
Mm.
just like, I think if on that first conversation, if I can understand what someone's life's like, are they into sports, what are the hobbies, and first off, kind of get that understanding of like who that person is as a person outside of work, so that over the coming months I can check in. So if I'm speaking to one of my ICP targets and I'm thinking, okay, I'm going to try and check in with the person on a monthly basis, it doesn't always have to be just, hi, how are you? Apologize for pestering. Is there any work here yet? Because
Yeah.
ultimately, like you continue apologizing and just for chasing, for doing your job, like you lose all respect in that person's eyes. Like I've always found there's two different channels with things. Have enough information where you can continually add value. So whether that's sending over maybe candidates who are passively looking but maybe come from a competitor, something like that, sending over market insights or rates, something that's always adding value to kind of make a worthwhile email. Secondly, from that, making sure the first time you speak to this person, I'm jotting down notes about what they like, what they don't like, the football team they support, so that, you know, if someone's a massive Liverpool fan and they get beat 3-0 at the weekend, I can say, haha, unlucky, that was bad on Saturday, wasn't it? How are you doing? And you've got that sort of more informal channel with them as well. So it's either
Yeah.
adding value or being kind of genuine enough to have a conversation with someone where you can kind of get that more personal side out of them, so you can continue to talk to them on that basis as well. They're kind of the two avenues I go down to keep things warm.
That's well said. One of the things you keep sort of mentioning is to keep the relationship from feeling transactional. You always try to add value. As a recruiter, as you span different verticals, different role types, doesn't it get overwhelming? I mean, you're dealing with like hundreds of companies, thousands of candidates. So how do you manage that complexity? Because your network is, I mean, you need your network to be like super active, right? I mean,
Yeah.
you're so first, it's commendable. B, how do you do that? How do you manage that?
It's something I think just a trait I'm blessed with in being like extremely organized and being good at timekeeping. But like my diary on a day to day basis is set up like on the hour every hour. I'll know that if I might have an
Mhm.
hour blocked out where I'm speaking to candidates to try and generate people or keep people warm. I have 2 hours here where I'm speaking to long-term strategic clients. I have 2 hours here where I'm speaking to, five, six, seven different people. I know every single person I'm speaking to from minute one of the day to the last minute of the day. And as
Mhm.
soon as you like stop doing that, or for me at least, like it does become too much, and that's when you start letting people down or getting your meetings wrong or not being prepared for meetings. Like
Mhm.
recruitment is like a very basic level. People have this picture of recruitment where it's Wolf of Wall Street, like Leonardo DiCaprio going around screaming over the phone and taking a lot of drugs and going crazy and all this stuff. Like that isn't recruitment. People who are good at recruitment, very driven and work hard, very consistent, whether they're having a really good month, a really bad month, they have the same attitude and workflow, and they're organized and good at timekeeping. If you can kind of tick those three things off and never let those kind of slide, you'll ultimately do well come the end of the year. I just try to keep that in mind on a day to day basis, speak to the right people, know when I'm speaking to them, and know what
Yeah.
I'm speaking to them about, and the rest kind of falls into place.
That's phenomenal, right? Making sure you have a clear schedule, you stick to it, making sure you're driven. The biggest predictor of success is being consistent. You talked about being consistent, you talked about adding value. Do you feel that introductions more valuable or building relationships is more valuable as a
Ooh,
recruiter?
good
I knew there was a
question.
trick question.
No, no, it's like something. If I'm trying to aim for a new client, my first port of call every time is, okay, how can I make this as warm as possible? So it's who are their mutual connections? Who can I speak to who could do me those introductions? Like I'll always aim to get an introduction first off if I'm going somewhere, but it's not to
Mhm.
say said person's going to reply. Like I get loads of introductions and then the person doesn't come back to me at all. Introductions are massive though, like because the market is so saturated. Like there's so many recruitment agents. Like I'm sure you get it yourself. You have recruitment agents and staffing agencies asking X, Y, and Z.
Yeah.
Like if someone can cut through that noise and say, he is Mitchell, he's good at what he does, chances are that's going to stand out. And you've just got to hope there's a need there for it on the other end to make said person reply. So the introductions are massive. I think in terms of relationships or like equally as big, I'd say it's much more on the US market, like I referred to sort of initially. On the UK side, the relationships almost don't matter as much, just because of the culture over here. Like ultimately, you still do. Like you want to go see your customer base, take them out for a coffee every once in a while and all that kind of stuff. But the relationships in the UK, because it's such a smaller place and it's so much more
Mhm.
saturated, everyone here is generally just a bit more moodier than than in the US. It's just like get me the work done, find me the right people, and move on. I'll let you know when I need you next. In the US, it's a completely different ball game. Like that just doesn't work. Like you've got to build trust, and the relationships are a huge factor of the US market. Like anyone who is considering moving onto US market, like you've got to be comfortable with the fact that probably for the first 3 to 6 months, if you've got no market there to go off or no leads there to go off, you're gonna have a very slow 6 months. And like that's what happened with me. Like it took me 6 months to kind of get running off the ground. Finally picked up and broke our first client over there. He started rolling from there, and you get some traction. And now we've got a good flow going. But the relationships in the US are massive. But ultimately, like the number one thing in my head when I get a lead or I find a target, it's okay, who can introduce me to this partner? So it's just as important as each.
That is such a good observation. I mean, just not just market styles, but the difference in how you approach these two distinct markets. So let's talk about, I know you've been part of, you have a very interesting background. You've done exceptionally well. You've built a trusted relationship with a lot of the targets that you go after. What do you do when you're not networking? When do you switch off? Or is it always on? I know recruitment is hard. So that's
It's
a question that I wanted to ask always.
certainly always on to a certain point. Like I'd even last night I was scheduling a meeting at 1 a.m. with someone who just come back to me. So it's always on to a point, which my girlfriend's never particularly thrilled about when she's in bed and the phone's ringing at 1 2 a.m. and it's someone
Yeah.
from the west coast with a call or
Hmm.
something. It's always on to a certain aspect, but like I'm happy with that. Like
Hmm.
recruitment suits a certain style of person.
Hmm.
The reason I love sales and why I feel so lucky that I've got into this job is like I'm an incredibly competitive person. Like I've grown up all my life playing sport, and like I love the fact that like the more I work in this job and like the harder I work than other people, eventually I'm going to be doing better than them. Like, that's
Yeah.
always something that massively drives me. Outside
Yeah.
of recruitment, I do a lot of sport, a lot of running, so that kind of keeps me busy outside of it. But it's a lot of recruitment and networking. That's
Yeah.
what it goes like.
Yeah, that takes me to an interesting question. We talked about the history and how these things have evolved for you, how networking has evolved for the recruitment industry in general, and specifically for you. I know you do a lot of lead gen through some introductions and some content generation that's pretty unique. If you could possibly design, I know we talked about this offline for a couple of weeks ago. If you could design the perfect, how should I say this, network of the future for leaders like yourselves, and the goal there for the network is essentially to help you know good people, understand and identify business opportunities. So for this network, what would it look like?
Well, do you know what? Like, I think obviously LinkedIn's the one you go to, and like obviously
Yeah.
LinkedIn's a fantastic tool and a brilliant website. Like, my main issue with LinkedIn is just the fluff around everything. You can't scroll on LinkedIn for more than 2 minutes without seeing someone's dog, someone's hike that they went on the weekend, and a coffee shop that they're sat in because they're moaning about work from home or whatever it might be. Like, it's all of that stuff, which like is the non-professional stuff, which I feel like really kind of ruins the sort of point of what LinkedIn is meant to be about. Like
Mhm.
for me, like a networking group or a networking kind of platform like that, it should be business and career focused around whichever niche you're in. And if you're interested in networking, recruitment, you follow X, Y, and Z people, like that's how it should be, and the content should be based around that. It's ultimately like what I struggle with is all that
Hmm.
added fluff to build engagement, and then you need this engagement to do this. Like that's just not what I'm like as a person. Like I'm not posting on Instagram all the time or on making TikTok dances and stuff. Like it's not who I am as a person. But you see more and more people doing it on LinkedIn because that's what gets the clicks these days.
Correct. Yep.
But yeah, somewhere to get rid of that added fluff where it's a group of people who are all kind of bought into that same idea of if something makes sense, I will help you out here. And in the future, when I need something back, you'll do the same for me. Like that's what that platform would look like in kind of layman's terms.
Absolutely. Yeah. And that's a great segue into what we're trying to build here at the Intro Code. Essentially, a group very similar to what you've described. It is not necessarily transactional, but it is very focused on, uh, getting the stuff done, getting the job done, right? If you need an introduction, a warm referral, whether it's for a job, a role that you're looking for, an opportunity, sales lead, a sales pitch, a VC pitch, right? That entire spectrum, we're bringing together these super connectors who can then help you with specific avenues that you can go to or get warm referrals, if you will. I would agree with that. I would say, in terms of LinkedIn, I know I post a lot of content around some of the nonprofit work I do. That drives, as you mentioned, that drives a lot of eyeballs. People get to know me as a sales leader. For me, that is important
Yeah.
because when they know me or they know of me, the conversations become easier.
Yeah.
So I like your strategy about creating content on LinkedIn. The podcast is a brilliant idea, by the way. That allows folks to realize that you are doing something different, something that they can benefit from. So it's mutually beneficial. And
Yeah.
I'm hoping that makes your conversations easier as you go out and target these ICPs.
Yeah, definitely. Like that's why like LinkedIn, like it can be a great tool. Like you mentioned, you can build this kind of profile of yourself, which allows you to be understood as a sales leader, so that it gives you that credibility. So just the one thing that like just irritates me is like, say, when people are just like, yeah, posting they've been on the 17th hike this week, woke up at 5 a.m. to do this, and it's just filled with so much rubbish, which like everyone knows it's rubbish as well, and everyone clicks and, oh my god, you're so inspiring, all
Yeah.
the rest of this. That's what I struggle with, but I think that's again like the sort of like cynical grit inside of me, which gets irritated by that. But no, like I told you, having the super connectors in the intro code, like it's an incredible idea where it said it's not transactional, but it gets the job done in so many
Mhm.
different elements, whether it's a VC pitch, sales pitch, an introduction into a hiring manager, whatever that might look like. There's so much scope with it. And I think it's a niche gap in the market at the moment, which LinkedIn doesn't really provide properly like that. So it's a brilliant idea. I'm excited to see where it goes.
Absolutely, yeah. And I'd love to have you on as we sort of formalize that a little bit. In the recruitment space, it's very easy for somebody to come across as, I don't want to say slick, but more salesy. So if somebody is in this space or wants to break into this space, wants to maintain the network like you do or build it out, what do you tell them? How can they reduce feeling salesy in their interactions? I know you've
Yeah.
touched on some of that before, but would be great to sort of sum it up.
Yeah, and again, it just goes back to being genuine and like you've got to find your own style, and like that goes in recruitment, in any kind of sales, or even just in life. Like when you feel comfortable in your own skin and you know how you operate, like there's so many different avenues to do things. Like I go back to Alfie, who works with us at SearchWorks, and he was top biller last year, had an incredible year. He's actually one of my like childhood best friends. I grew up with him, and he's always been like quiet as a mouse. Like he's just got a relaxed personality. He's quite chilled out. Like I'm a bit more kind of in your face,
Mhm.
100 miles an hour. I try not to be sometimes, but you would look at someone like Alfie and think like, okay, probably not the typical recruiter style. He's a little bit more quiet, a little bit more reserved, but he just owns who he is and he does it brilliantly. Like people like him for that and trust him for that. He adds value. So that's his sales style, where it's relaxed, quiet, adds value, gets a job done, and doesn't cause you any issues. Like that's what you've just got to own, you being genuine. Like it comes back to what I said earlier, like you've got to speak to someone, or at least for me this works the same way as you would do if you bumped into him in a bar or in a coffee shop or walking past the street. Like when you try and have that super salesy approach and like slick guy going to close £100 million worth of deals and thinks you're the bee's knees, like it doesn't last long, and people kind of see through that facade. It's very kind of old school salesy. Like you just got to be yourself. And like I said,
Sure.
it's being consistent, sticking with things, doing all the jobs that you've got to do in a day, and then going home knowing like, all right, I've put a good shift in. And as long as you can tick those boxes, like everything else falls into place. Like that would be my message. Just be yourself. If you're good at what you do, you're good at what you do, and it'll work out.
You've realized what you're good at, which is what a lot of folks are not able to discern. You've put in the hard work. One of the things you said that resonated with me is being genuine. Hey, you don't need to pretend. It's a lot of noise if you start to pretend all of a sudden, right? And people can look through that. The second one would be owning who you are. That example is phenomenal. I can tell you, personally speaking, it took me at least the first decade of my working life, my career, before I realized those two fundamental points, like owning who I am, being who I am. And since then, my career trajectory has been markedly different. So
Yeah.
thanks for sort of highlighting that. Just sort of to wrap it up, you worked across different industries. What is the one thing that has helped you be successful as you glided across these industries?
Yeah, the big thing is being able to outline the key players in said industry, and then thinking, okay, what are these next steps to getting closer and closer to those people? Like it really is at times like who you know, not what you know. Obviously, what you know
Huh.
is still very important. But yeah, that's it. If you can outline key players, work out issues, work out how you can solve those issues, and then you slowly work towards them. Like that's been the real thing for us. And yeah, it's all good kind of like I said, sort of being that generalist and jack of all trades over the short term, but it kind of mirrors back to what I said, hence why I don't go to a lot of networking events in the UK, because ultimately like that's going to kind of pull me away from my industry. And like you can't be 1 foot in and 1 foot out, like, but to understand it, understand the people, understand the markets, understand the different niches and locations, the
Yeah.
technologies, how things are evolving, like you just got to chuck yourself in and trust the process that everything else will build up around it. And like I said, you kind of go through all those different avenues that I mentioned at the start, whether it's podcasting, speaking to candidates, befriending and building relationships, looking at investment news, I still do try and attend some webinars sometimes if they're online, and
Oh,
that's a good
interesting.
place to try and get up to. But ultimately, like if you're going into an industry, you need to know the industry. If someone said to you, can you speak for 5 minutes about X, and you can't, you're probably not going to succeed in it. So just really chucking yourself in at the deep end and trying to cover as many angles as you can do to ultimately think, I want to do recruitment for X, Y, and Z company. How can I get there? And building out from there.
Absolutely. Well said. Well said, Mitchell. Just in terms of closing this for today, want to open the floor to you to tell us a little bit more about SearchWorks, what you are involved with. If folks are looking for help, leave a couple of minutes for your pitch
Yeah,
here.
no, perfect.
I appreciate you on the podcast.
It's all good. Thank you for having me. It's been brilliant. It's a different angle for me being a guest on a podcast compared to hosting
For
it.
sure.
I was sitting on here a little bit nervous before we started, but like, look, I'm sure the people listening to this at this point will know that I specialize in payment technology across the US. Like I said, we focus initially. We founded as a tech first agency. Obviously, as kind of client scope and needs have grown further. We now cover commercials, kind of go to market and operations with some legal and compliance in there. So across that payment technology kind of industry and a little bit broader fintech, but it's got that payments element to it. I'd like to think I'm your man and I can fill a lot of jobs. Of course, yeah, we do that. Have the podcast Leaders in Business, which you can find on SearchWorks, on the Spotify, or equally on my LinkedIn as well, Mitchell Wright. So I like to try and think the content that we post on my LinkedIn page is usually centered around payment technology news, or maybe recent funding companies, some recruitment nuggets about sales, etc., or the podcast too. So I like to think we add value to the industry, and I'm trying to make a good mark in it, and hopefully we're getting there.
Amazing. Mitchell, thank you so much. That was a great pitch for SearchWorks, and congratulations on your continued success. Thanks for being an amazing guest for the podcast, and thank you again. We'll get a chance to work together in the future.
You know, I really appreciate it. Like I said, thank you for having me on Pushkar. It's a lot of brilliant stuff that you're putting together at the moment, and the podcast looks like it's going to be great too. So we'll have to get one booked in at some point next year, and we can talk about how successful we've been for an hour.
I will take you up on that. That sounds like a great idea. And just for everybody watching, I will put all the links that Mitchell mentioned here on the description below, so you can click on it. Look at SearchWorks, look at the podcast links on Spotify, and if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to Mitchell directly.
Perfect. Thanks,
Mitchell,
Pushkar. I really appreciate it.
sounds good. Bye bye.